India has been an apathetic society overall.
I think a lot of it has to do with a certain degree of self-confidence, what in Hindustani we would call Atmavishwas.
Problem with India has been that India doesn't have a learning curve.
Hi everyone, a very warm welcome to my channel, Booked, Line and Sinker. India was an economic superpower. We were the land of mathematicians and we were called Sone ki Chidiya. It's been 70 years since our independence and we as a nation are still reminiscing about that glorious past instead of studying it and learning from that success. What are the lessons from history that we as a nation have failed to learn? Today I'm going to be in conversation with the authors of the book, Making India Great Again, Learnings from History. And we're going to be talking about India's past and the learnings that we need to imbibe as a nation and as Indian citizens. If you're new to my channel, I'm Nimisha. I'm a voice artist and a book lover. And on this channel, we have inspiring conversations about books and all things related. So if you're looking for book recommendations, reviews, reading tips, and author specials similar to the one I'm doing today, then please do give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the bell icon. Because every time you do that, it gives me a little more visibility on YouTube. Let's get into today's video. Well, as I'd mentioned earlier, I have two very prominent guests with me today. I have Professor Rajiv Lochan over here, who is a famous historian and a professor from Punjab University, Chandigarh. He has written over 6 books, and his last book on farmer suicide actually led the government to make certain changes to help farmers in distress. He's also a famous columnist. He writes regularly for newspapers and journals. Thank you for being here. I also have Mrs. Meeta Lochan, who is a force to reckon with in her own right. She is a senior bureaucrat in the Indian Administrative Services. She has been the Secretary Health in Maharashtra, where she has made some fundamental changes in the health system in Maharashtra, which have been modeled across India today. Currently, she is the member secretary of the National Commission of Women. And together they have co-authored the book, Making India Great Again, Learning from Our History. Thank you again for being here. There has been so much written in the past about what have been the areas where India has failed to develop in the field of politics, education, etc. Your book talks about learnings from history. What would you say is the starting point where we should go back to actually glean that knowledge?
I think that if you look at our past, then there is a lot to be gained in almost every century and every period. I think that if you look at the entirety of the Indian tradition, there's a lot to be learned. Have we really documented any of it so that it becomes, or systematized any of it so that it becomes possible to learn? That is the question.
Right now we are having this problem with China. And in these 4 months, a lot of people have come in and they have said that the Chinese build their policies by reading their ancient texts, the Art of War, etc. And then they start quoting from the Art of War. No one seems to be quoting from the Mahabharata. No one seems to be saying that our experience of the last 150 years and our experience of the last 70 years of independence is also good enough to deal with the Chinese. This doesn't require you to go back to Lao Tse and God knows what in the past. All that it requires is some common sense in the 21st century. But why would we not think about the Indian past and learn from their ideas on how things can be dealt with?
I think I completely agree with what you're saying, and in your book what you've talked about is that our lack, we were the Sone ki Chidiya, so as to speak, and we were an economic force to reckon with, and then when the Britishers came in, we did not fight back, as you say. There was a sense of apathy towards the nation by the state as well as the merchants. They did not fight enough to, make a grounding to stand for themselves?
See, now that you use the word apathy, that word apathy is something which underlies much of the narrative in this book.
Yes.
India has been an apathetic society overall. Think about the great drama that happened in the last 6 years, and the Prime Minister making a joke about Ganesha's head being plastic surgery. All that he was mentioning was in a light-hearted manner to a group of surgeons that maybe we had plastic surgery in the past. We have examples of it. And yes, we do have plastic surgery in the past. And these are things which have been documented by the British. That is what the problem is. They've been documented by the British. Where is our documentation? We say that this has to do with our overall apathy to learning anything.
And I would add over there that to take another strand in Indian tradition, this is experience with iron and steel. Now, for the last 2000 years, the fame of Hindustanis as people who are very good with working iron, who produce steel, which is the best in the world, that is something which was known the world over till as late as the mid 19th century. So actually, India had an edge over other societies in terms of this learning. But today, when we wish to study that or to understand how they were able to create this wondrous material, we go back to either English descriptions or there's French descriptions or there's Dutch descriptions of our own.
And you know what happens with this when we are apathetic towards learning, when we are apathetic towards recording our own experiences in a systematic manner. Systematic is important,
Yes.
Being concerned is important, and transmitting this knowledge, this is important. What happens is that this knowledge, which is transferred from the guru to the shishya through personal interaction, this knowledge simply vanishes. For example, the Ras Ratnakar Samucchay, which documents details the creation of this particular kind of iron. This is one of the best weapon grade steels in the world, by the way. When after the mutiny of 1857, the British prohibited Indians from making any weapons or carrying any weapons. Within 2 decades, 20 years, Indians had forgotten how this thing was made.
I think that's a very important point, that our lack of records and lack of systemized, keeping of that knowledge has been a major drawback for us as a nation. You also talk about institutions, our lack of developing institutions which can actually work, using the knowledge which already exists. Where did we fail in that area?
See, once we have a society in which we believe that all our knowledge has to be in contemporary period, no memories are important. Remember what is science and what is scientific temper. Science and scientific temper is having a clear observation, subjecting this observation to tests against reality so that we know that this observation is a correct observation, and then drawing conclusions from this. Once we have drawn a conclusion, then subjecting that conclusion to further tests of a similar variety. What we did pursue in the name of science was maggabaji. We did not bother to force ourselves to understand the principles of science. The total length of India, for example, Kashmir to Kanyakumari, this is given with a great amount of accuracy in documents which are over 1,000 years old. The problem was we never translated this knowledge into anything worthwhile, into anything practical. You use the phrase "Sone ki chidiya." It was around this time that India came to be known as Sone ki chidiya.
All the word they use is a philosopher's stone, that there's something magic, some kind of philosopher's stone in Hindustan, that everything that touches it turns to gold. So
Yes.
that was the kind of image. When you talk about science and scientific method, you need to document whatever is done in such a way that it can be replicated. Unless it can be replicated and understood by somebody who doesn't have access to the original, it cannot grow.
So that's a very important and very pertinent point you've brought about, that we had that knowledge of mathematics. We had that knowledge of iron and steel making. We were very strong in our banking as well. But we were not able to replicate that post even after independence.
Oh, after independence, we simply gave up. By the time we became independent, we were so overwhelmed by the fact that we were running our own government that we misused the government. We misused all the institutions that the British had created for us, and we did our level best to bring them down. The institutions in the West got created by chance. So it was not as if the West was destined to create those institutions or anything. What happened was, even when we learnt about those institutions and we began using those institutions, modern schools, modern colleges, modern universities, the modern system of bureaucracy, we did not give it much heed. We did not try to understand what the logic underlying them was. The East India Company was using Indian weaponsmiths till as recently as 1813, 1814. It is in the 1820s that for the first time we start getting evidence that weapons produced in Europe are of a superior grade as compared to weapons produced in India. So anyone who says that Indians lost XYZ war because the Europeans had better weapons, excuse me, you've learnt wrong history. Indians had better weapons. Indians had more soldiers. Indians had more everything. Even the soldiers who were fighting for the Europeans, the British and the French, they were Indian soldiers. Indian soldiers had greater trust in the European commander because the European commander was paying them regularly. What was the Indian commander doing? Indian commander आधा पैसा pocket में रखता था, आधा पैसा pay करता था. The same stuff which you hear about today, extreme amount of corruption we call it today. In those days it was not called corruption. The word corruption had not yet come in, but the processes were the same. And the one with the greatest amount of power is going to take away everything that the rest of us have. And we had allowed that situation to exist. Even after the British had left and we got those institutions with us, we did not nurture those institutions. The one big thing that we did was the Constitution of India. It was an absolutely fantastic document. For us, the most important thing is to remember is that we are capable of creating institutions, but we need to have our heart in it. We think that Indians lost that heart. And perhaps the recent past, the way Indians have been behaving, we have regained the desire to survive and live and flourish. And remember, one of the most important things about India has been, in the past as well as today, India doesn't go out and exploit people in order to become big. China went out and China exploited 6 nationalities. It conquered 6 nationalities. Now they call them Chinese nation. Presently they have conquered Tibet and now they are busy conquering the northern borders of India. Now this kind of conquest, the Chinese are making a great effort to conquer Pakistan. You can imagine that after some time they'll say Pakistanis are actually Chinese, which just might happen. India has never ever done that. What India needs to do is India needs to sharpen its learning curve. You had said earlier about the learning curve.
Yes.
The problem with India has been that India doesn't have a learning curve. What India has had is a flat learning line. We need to stop that line. We need to make it a steep curve, and we need to say that this learning has to be quick enough.
Yes.
If you've traveled on the highways, everyone is using FASTag today. Most of your population has gone over to Bheem UPI or Google Pay or something like that. And if we can learn these new tricks so fast, we've demonstrated that our ability not to learn is not a congenital defect.
And it can be
remedied.
Yes.
I would like to supplement that to say that I think a lot of it has to do with a certain degree of self-confidence, what in Hindustani we would call Atmavishwas. So if you believe that you have the ability to do, then you perhaps might be able to pick up these strands and say, oh yes, like he said, that the FASTag caught on so fast. When the UID was created as a platform to link 1.3 billion people, that was quite a unique feat. And you had naysayers saying that this is not possible. How can you do this? It will create so many troubles for people. And now all of a sudden, in the pandemic times, you find that is one thing which has provided an infrastructural platform which has acted as a force multiplier for everyone.
Why do we doubt our abilities all the time?
I have a question over there about the role of the state. At the moment, I think part of the doubt stems from a doubt in the capacity of the state and the way it's been functioning for so many years. You talked about corruption. You talked about a long, lengthy legal system which still exists in our country today. There are so many issues which the state needs to take on as their own and make those changes to spread, knowledge and actually create those institutions. So what do you think is the role of the state, and what are the changes which need to come about over there?
We need to learn most of all. And remember, the state is an institution. It is constructed like that it needs to have institutional memories, it needs to have documentation consistently. So that could be used to learn and to improve. So that is a degree of self-reflexivity which all institutions of the state, whatever they might be, at whatever level they might exist, we need to build that.
You also need to keep one thing in mind. The state in India distanced itself from the people. Take, for example, the case of conducting elections. The law says that the election commission can ask anyone to step in to help out in the processes of the election. This entire process is handled by clerks, peons, chota babus, bada sahabs, chota sahabs. A citizen like me will not be part of that. I simply cannot walk into the election commission office and say that I volunteer to conduct elections. You post me for that period and I'll help you out conduct your election. They don't agree to that. They say, school ke master ko lagate. And the school ka master says, my job is to teach. Why are you bothering me? This is a major disconnect. That is because the state does not use civilians. The state does not use people like you and me, those who are not members of the state, to execute a large number of tasks. Today, when something like this happens, the state says, we will use you only if you're an NGO. I promptly form an NGO, not to execute anything, but to milk the state. Yeah. People say these NGOs are frauds. The people say that the state is a fraud. And then the only person on whom the people can have any trust is the IAS officer who's an SDM. The poor IAS officer SDM is all of 28 years old, 25 years old. That SDM barely knows how to tie their own shoelaces. And here they're supposed to catch criminals. No wonder they end up doing tamancha baji, catching the sand mafia, catching wrong builders, demolishing this building, demolishing that building. Indians start clapping at that. Ki ji, hamara sahab kitna acha kaam kar raha, the state is functioning. Your question arises, yes. Why is justice not being done in this country? Yes. Okay, it's not being done in this country because the state has not involved the people of India into the running of the state. The people of India need to be involved on a much larger scale. Structures have to be created to involve everyone. This is what happens across the civilized world. Everywhere in a civilized country, normal civilians are roped in to perform duties for the state. It also creates legitimacy for the actions of the state. Today, a large number of policemen are saying, please allow civil visits of school children to the police thana. At least they'll discover that the police thana is a nice place. Now, this kind of interfacing has to be done at virtually every level. And the state will have to get out of this high and mighty thinking, we know what is good for everyone and everyone needs to obey us. Excuse me, I'm not obeying you, get lost.
Well, I think the state also needs to, like in your book you've mentioned, learn from all the wrongs that we have done. Even putting 1% of what we have invested in a particular scheme to figure out where we went wrong and what we did right. That kind of learning which needs to come through from each and every exercise that we undertake as a nation, that has not happened so far.
Yeah. Well, it has not happened because the state has been too snooty about itself. Take the example of the university system and the school system. In the 1990s, for some reason, the government in India decided to interfere in the education system and try to improve the education system. All of a sudden, it was officers of the government who started doing that. Since then, you have had a continuous decline in higher education, school education, and virtually every component of the education. And this COVID crisis has exposed the weaknesses of the Indian education system completely. This education system has nothing to do with education. One would have imagined that the state would say, we give up. Let people handle their education. Let the universities be free. Has that happened? No. Every second day you read about how the MHRD has ordered exams to be conducted by this date. Who are you to order anyone to conduct exam by a particular date? Let the Vice Chancellor decide. Let the college principal decide. Let the school principal decide. Does the college principal, the Vice Chancellor, the head of the department, do they have absolutely no commitment to their institution? To presume that these people who have dedicated their lives 25, 30 years to the institution, they don't have any commitment. But a government officer who has come on this posting 3 months ago, he has some commitment. I don't believe that.
In higher education, perhaps more than any other sphere, the people who are involved in delivering it, they need to have a stake in the system. And they cannot have a stake in the system if everything is going to be done by diktat. So you need to give people a stake. And interestingly, you talked about tradition. This is the one thing in which we did have a tradition of this variety. You had a Gurukul, where the teacher was all in all for his teachers. So you could take that as a basis, and an improvement on that is what is needed.
Yes, and we need to make changes not just in the education sector. I think the health sector also. Please, I would like you to elaborate on that, because you've been such a prominent figure in that area. And in your book, you do mention about how we have the capability to even do health tourism. What is your opinion on that?
Over there, as we have found out, you need an institutional infrastructure which would supplement the strength of the doctors. But at the level of the general practitioner, if you recall, what are the states which are doing well? They are those states which already have some essence of primary care through a general practitioner. And after that, you need to have simply methods for data collation. Let the doctor free. Just find ways to strengthen his hands. That is the kind of structure which I would suggest would be the best placed to deal with any crisis of the kind that we are facing today.
In your book, you've also mentioned about the land mafia, and also about legal systems which are faltering on so many levels. How can we tackle that area, which is, the legal and the justice system is literally God in India in so many levels?
The narrative in the book has contract as its underlying theme. India simply didn't have a system of contracts. The contract between you and me was mediated by God. Once the British came in and brought in the modern system of contract, God vanished from the scene. And once God vanished, then it became impossible for us to adhere to contracts. So what I tell you by way of a contract is of no value anyway. Piece of paper can easily be ignored and rejected by either of us whenever we feel like, because the judges and the police and the other civil administration is simply not strong enough. We have had almost all contracts being short-term contracts. India has never had long-term contracts. Because we did not have long-term contracts, our businesses were always circumscribed. Our businesses were always short businesses. We could not imagine our business going on for 4 years, 5 years, or even beyond 1 year. One season was the maximum that a contract subsisted in India. Now that kind of a thing is simply not good enough in the modern world. In the modern world, contracts are much longer contracts. Think about the Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty. The Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty was signed in August 1971. It was supposed to last for 20 years. And it lasted 20 years. And India and the Soviet Union stood with each other through thick and thin for those years. And during that period, we built up enough trust between each other that after 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Russians were in great trouble, many countries across the world, they paid back their debt in dollar terms, which basically meant that they had to pay about 1/10 of what they owed the Soviet Union. India refused to pay in dollars. India said, we'll continue to pay you in rupees and rubles and bags of wheat and bags of pulses and bags of sugar, which basically meant that India paid, as compared to the rest of the world, India paid 10 times more to the Soviet Union, to now the broken up Soviet Union, than any other country had. Which from a business point of view is an extraordinarily bad decision to take. Except that a little while later India exploded a nuclear bomb and the whole world started jumping around saying, do this, you should never do this, we will put sanctions on you. So who said, okay, let's not bother about them? The Russians. That is trust. That's not contract anymore. But that trust was built because of a contract in the past. In the absence of contract, you have had a situation in which anyone and everyone feels that we can violate every other person's right and freedom at will. And when that starts happening on a large enough scale, then it becomes possible for you to use the word land mafia. Think about it this way, the system of checks. Indians were notorious for signing checks which they could not honor. And why were they doing it? Because there was no sanctity to it. It was just a bloody piece of paper. No? So I give you a piece of paper. Go get lost. I'm not paying you anything more. And then a little while ago, the government said, if you sign a bad check, you go to jail. And since then, about 80% of the cases in our civil courts are check bounce cases. Indians have not yet learned कि झूठा check नहीं sign करना चाहिए.
See, that's the another thing. When you don't have a completely functional legal system, then the costs of doing business in that society go up. Because every time, whenever you make an investment anywhere, then you figure out all these things. Will I be able to get my money back? That's the first question which a businessman asks. If I'm going to give a 6-month loan, how will I give it back? And almost everyone, when asked about the Indian business climate, will say that we are never sure of this, simply because we are not sure that if there is a dispute of any kind, will I be able to settle it within a few months. So that is something which going forward I think we need to do. And a major theme you'll find in this book is how to do business, and whether businessmen can depend on these institutional structures and in order to reduce the costs of doing business and to scale up.
That brings us to the way forward for India as a nation. What would you say in your mind are the primary learning or the crux of this book for India in the future?
I think for that people will have to read.
Yes, of course. It's an incredible book. It's a non-fiction book, and it's going to give you a lot of insights as to how India needs to grow in the coming future.
Please read the book.
Please read the book.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm Nimisha. Please do subscribe to my channel and turn on the notifications, because I do book-related videos every week and you don't want to miss them. Until the next book, bye-bye.